Dave Rubenstein, welcome back, my friend. How are you?
I'm good, Ty. I'm very good. I'm very excited for this. I don't know what we're calling this series of episodes. One of my favorite things that we do is we come up with, 2 years ago, it was like, why aren't they 6-6 or why aren't they 9-3? I forget what we actually called the episodes. I know Will It Ever Happen was something we did.
We did that last year.
That was last year's. And like, what, and the year before was right. Like, what's the barrier to double digit wins? What's the barrier to being like a consistent, comfortable bowl team or whatever? I don't know what we're calling this year, but I know that most, if not every year, we're going to figure out a way to include USC in this series just so we can have Ryan Abraham on the show.
I think that's right. Why don't we call it Trending Up, Trending Down?
Yeah.
Or something.
Like
we can workshop that title, but I think that's the question that a lot of people are asking this time of year. It is that time of year where, yes, it is lighter on news. We have talked about that ad nauseum, but you can truly zoom into a team and ask some probing questions, trying to figure out, is this team headed in a good direction? Is it not headed in a good direction? And unfortunately for USC, we have found ourselves in this situation year in and year out, especially over the last few years, where we're wondering just that. Where is this program headed? Lincoln Riley's a high-profile guy. He's clearly had a ton of success, at least on the offensive side of the ball. He's been in playoff games. He's pumped out Heisman winners and first-round talent. And yet we still have these lingering questions about, is he going to get the job done at USC? It was a big splash hire when they went out and they got him, and he's got a very healthy buyout to keep him there for the foreseeable future. Is he going to be able to get over that hump? That's why we're going to bring Ryan on today.
It's sort of like when you are catching up with somebody that you know very well, that you have a long history with. I'm not talking about Ryan, but kind of talking about Ryan. But this series of episodes could be, this is our alt title. You know when you meet up with somebody and you say, how you doing? And they say, I'm good. And then if they're a close enough person in your life, you could potentially say, okay, but how are you really doing?
Yeah. How are you?
How are you? Just great. How is everything? Just let it all out. And that's, to me, I'm trying to get to the core. How are you really doing? Yeah. And I don't know if that's me as I'm aging and wanting to be there for people, or being so optimistic with all things NC State last year that I really wish that we could have asked NC State, no, but how are you really doing? How's it really going? And so I don't know how you put that, like, vibes : how are you really doing in a title, but I like where your head is at.
Well, if you've got a better idea for a title, you know the drill.
Not yet. We'll see.
You can always write in. I'm talking to the Verballerhood now. solidverbal@gmail.com. You can, of course, go to verballers.com. You know, that's our Patreon community where you can get ad-free episodes, bonus content, Discord access, playing games, and whatnot. If nothing more, hit follow, hit subscribe so that you don't miss any of these episodes. We're going twice a week all throughout the offseason here. And yeah, as you said, we're excited to have Ryan Abraham from USC football on to ask some of these questions with respect to USC. We've been setting up interviews for the next couple weeks, I guess is probably the right way to phrase that. So we'll bring on other people from teams, from other disciplines within the sport to keep it interesting here as we go through April. Before you know it, it'll be spring football. We can talk a little bit about that. We, of course, have our episode coming up with Nate Tice. We haven't said this to Nate yet, but we've been doing it for 5 years. So I'm assuming Nate will come back and talk to us about what he has learned in his self-study getting ready for the NFL draft. I know.
Did you see Mike Tice is now involved in the Nate Tice broader universe?
I did. Well, I know it's his dad, so I'd assume on some level he's involved. But what's he doing? He's
responsible for Nate Tice. Let's be honest.
Sure,
but and that not his media success, but his existence.
Right, exactly.
No, but I saw them talking offensive linemen, and that Mike Tice, obviously given his background, was weighing in and scouting draft eligible offensive linemen. It was very cool to see.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll have to ask Nate about that when we bring him on. But that is coming up here. We will keep you, I promise, engaged throughout the month of April. But without further ado, should we just jump right in?
I'm ready.
All right, Dan, without further ado, we are very pleased to welcome back one of our longtime friends here, one of the true podcasting OGs, at least in the sports world.
But he's 28 years old, Ty. Let's be very clear.
Got a very early start. Yeah. Ryan Abraham from over at USCfootball.com. How are you, Ryan? How goes it?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, I think we're getting close to the 20-year mark for our podcasting thing. I think we both started like 2008. Like it's getting up there. Jeez.
I think we owe him like a smoking jacket. Like SNL does the special jackets for the 5-time hosts. We need some sort of luxurious velvet or velour situation to honor. I think the law, like it's probably Bruce and Ryan, both down there in the South Bay. Like I would imagine. I don't know who else there is
among the earliest guests that I can remember. I think Bruce was pretty early on the curve. Ryan was definitely in there. Stu Mandel.
Yeah.
Stu Mandel and Andy. We've had Andy on for a long time.
Yeah.
So we'd have to actually we need to put the spreadsheet together, but we could probably figure out a smoking jacket situation. Yeah.
What's our jacket budget, Ty? Just ballpark.
Not as much as it needs to be.
Yeah, you guys are huge now. When we started, it was just like this small little podcast. Now you guys are like a big deal. So that's great to be on again.
That's what I tell my wife, Ryan. That's what I tell my wife. Where are we starting, Ty?
Well, I wanted to start here because last season, as you know, was USC's first in the Big Ten. Other than the 4-5 conference record, whatever it was, obviously that was not ideal. Was the move a positive experience for USC? For you, covering USC? How do you feel about that now in retrospect?
I mean, personally, it was fun because of a bunch of new road trips. Now, I miss some of the Pac-12 stuff. It's just weird, like watching like Arizona State news or Colorado news, and it's not really being part of what I'm covering really now. But to be able to go to Minnesota or see the Big House for the first time, some of those trips, that was cool. That was like a cool experience. I think a lot of the fans we talked to, being able to do that. But there was a lot of trips. I went to Maryland. There's just a lot of flying and a lot of time zones you have to cross. I think for USC, they were trying to get things right, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And there were some positive, reviews from what Lynn was able to do coming in. But having some of those road losses where you were winning in the fourth quarter and weren't able to close it out, I mean, obviously that's going to leave a bad taste in your mouth. But the schedule was a lot more manageable than I thought coming in. Michigan wasn't as good as everyone thought. They certainly had a chance to win that game. I think it was, kind of dipping your toes into the Big Ten waters. And they were like, okay, we can play with these guys, but they got to figure out a way to get some of these wins on the road. And I think this year the schedule is kind of similar, but I think it was okay for the first year, but you would have liked to, had better than a 500 record. Like you said, 4-5 in conference isn't going to cut it. I mean, it's nice getting a couple of wins against SEC teams during the, season of the bowl game, but they needed to do better, especially, to be Maryland's only Big Ten win. You don't want that, like to wear that for the rest of the offseason. No. That's where USC is now.
No, nobody wants that. I was thinking back a little bit when I knew you were coming on to that moment when USC was first announced to the Big Ten, and this tidal wave of think pieces that were published online to the tune of, are they going to need to adapt their style to play in the Big Ten? What will USC need to do to adapt to this more physical brand of smash mouth football? Like, there were so many of those you could have powered the earth if you could harness the energy from them for like a decade. It was kind of ridiculous, kind of funny, kind of made you wonder, other than the travel, which you just alluded to, was there any kind of adaptation that USC needed to, I don't know, put in place in order to compete in the Big Ten, or was that mostly just for takes?
Yeah, I think it's mostly takes. I mean, if you look at USC's offense, it fell off a cliff compared to where Lincoln Riley's offenses have been. He's always had top 5. I think there was one year they were number 6 in the country, and then I think they were down in the 30s or something like that. Of course, they switched quarterbacks, 2/3 of the way through the season. But I don't think that was like an adjustment to Big Ten play. I just think was, they had sort of neglected the defensive side of the ball for a long time. That first year when Lincoln Riley won 11 games, they brought in some superstar talent through the portal, but most of it was on the offensive side, like Jordan Addison and Caleb Williams obviously winning the Heisman and all that. I think they really did a good job trying to address things on the defensive side. I'm not saying that's why you sort of fell off offensively, but, he's always had this kind of quarterback that was, so many guys, 3 number 1 overall picks and all the Heisman winners and all that. And they just didn't have someone like that last season. And for whatever reason, it didn't work. So I don't think it was an adjustment per se. I think it was just sort of like they had a fall off on the offensive side of the ball. I think they are trying to, address some of the big body issues. I think they weren't big enough on the defensive line last year, and that could be some of the reason why they weren't able to, kind of close things out in the fourth quarter. I think they've done a pretty good job addressing that this offseason, but maybe not adjustments as much as just they've had their own growing pains. It's, USC was a mess when Lincoln Riley took over. You get a lot of success right away and then sort of fallen off since then. So I think they're trying to address a lot of their internal issues, fixing what's inside USC more than like adjusting to what it's going to be like in the Big Ten.
Let's be clear. USC's defense in 2024 was not a disaster. They had moments that I'm sure they'd like back, but it had been, for large stretches of 2022 and 2023, a disaster.
Yes.
Now, there are reasons that are very easy to point to, like they got off the field on third down way more, and it was very noticeable that they were blitzing a lot more successfully under Danton Lynn. When you look at USC and the improvements that they made in 2024, obviously, I, as you alluded to, as you mentioned, it's Danton Lynn and the defense probably just doing boring things more often, just boring tackles on the edge. When you think about how the defense improved and, whatever, remove the context of they didn't necessarily play a bunch of explosive offenses like they did in the Pac-12, what was it about Danton Lynn's stamp on this defense that led to more boring success?
Yeah, I think, you alluded to with the third down success. They weren't really good on fourth down, but, some of it's because they got a lot of third down stops. And to me, for years, the linebacker production had been so poor. And they've had some talented guys there, but that, if your defense is good, usually the linebackers are making plays. If it's batting the ball down, whatever it is, or, making that tackle that you need to make and not letting the safeties and the secondary kind of make those. It's just, USC has had like their safeties, leading the team in tackles and things like that. And it just didn't get the kind of production from the linebacker spot. But they brought in Matt Entz, who was they really overhired in the defensive, coaching room, where Matt Entz won national championships at the FCS level. And when I listened to him and talk about, hey, I'm the head coach of the linebackers, I was like, okay, they're not real deep there, but they're going to get a lot of production out of them. And they did. And now they got to get Rob Ryan. I think you're going to get a similar result there. So to me, it was really the linebacker room. Yeah, they weren't real deep on the defensive line. They were pretty deep in the secondary last year, but they weren't getting the production from the linebackers. And we're not getting that. I think it's really hard to have a good defense. So I thought they got better, not maybe talent-wise, but really production. They did a much better job. And I think it was the coaching and the scheme from Danton Lynn. And they're hoping they can continue that. You're going to lose Entz. He's now the head coach at Fresno State. But I like Rob Ryan a lot, just watching a couple practices, seeing him yelling at guys and stuff. I'm like, all right, I feel like they're pretty good there at that spot as well. But you need those linebackers to be good. And they just weren't, for especially the first couple of years of Lincoln Riley's time.
It's pretty difficult to diagnose, as you mentioned, the fourth quarter struggles, especially on the road. Pretty, whether it's a conditioning thing, whether it's a depth thing, whether it's a preparation thing, whether it's obviously quarterback and turnover thing. In the moment, what did you feel like was the reason or main reasons for the inability to close out? And I guess with the benefit of time, what do you feel like Lincoln Riley and USC, what are they doing to address being better prepared and better closing out those games? Like they had an opportunity to close out a team that ended up in the college football playoff semis in Penn State at home and obviously couldn't get it done. What key needs to be turned? What button needs to be pushed, in your opinion?
It's almost like a lack of confidence with the team in general. And I think offensively, you just always felt that, okay, whoever you got the ball in the last, you're going to go make a play and score a touchdown. It just didn't seem like they had that confidence. And that's something not just in the fourth quarter. I mean, you shouldn't be in a close situation with Maryland at the end of the game. They're just that's not that good of a team. So I think there's two things. You really have to be able to put away teams that you're better than. They're certainly more talented than on the road or whatever. But so I think, Dan, it's a lot of just like the confidence in this team, like knowing they just didn't seem to, hey, we got a little better here. We're doing this okay here. But I don't know if it all came together where they all just feel like, hey, we're this well-oiled machine. We know what we're going to go out and do. Yeah, maybe we play poorly in the first half. We're going to come out and make some plays. And it just did seem like that was lacking a little bit. I don't know. I mean, I don't think it was a team that was out of shape. I think they did a much better job on the offseason when they got rid of Alex Grinch, who liked a smaller, kind of quicker defense. The guys got bigger and stronger. And I mean, everyone does that in the offseason, right? But they actually looked, like, oh, these guys look different. But I didn't feel like they were running out of gas at the end of the game or anything. So I think it's a combination of things, but just really having a lot of confidence in, like, hey, we can put this together, go out and win. And, losing some of those early, it almost seemed like that impacted later on too. Like if they would have won that Michigan game where they looked like they certainly could have won, it would have been a big win in the big house. You might have some different results going forward, but it seemed to me, Dan, like a lot of just sort of lack of confidence that they could close these out. And once you start losing those close road games, it just kept happening and happening. And it's sort of like a, self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess.
It's an interesting situation too, because of how USC opened the season. I think it was in Vegas against LSU, where I was like, oh, this USC team with a confident Miller Moss, the defense is making plays, the receiver room looks stacked. What happened to the firepower on offense last season? And I guess where does it stand now? Because it really, like, two good running backs there, Quentin Joyner and Woody Marks, obviously Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon, Zachariah Brandt. Like, it just seemed like Miller Moss had so many options. He played so confidently in that huge spot. What went wrong in terms of, like, the confidence of this offense, of, a Lincoln Riley offense? It's just like something you could always count on. And it looked like they were going to have another year where, like, oh, this is going to be a top 15 offense and be super interesting.
Yeah, there was a lot of optimism. I mean, one of my writers, Connor Morissette, had preseason predicted USC to go 7-5, and then he got absolutely crushed when USC beats LSU. You're like, oh, 7-5, whatever, and they ended up going 6-6. So, like, yeah, he had his victory lap later, but he was actually overly optimistic. But I think watching that game, they did all the things you would want to do. I mean, they came up with some big defensive stops. Miller Moss gets a drive at the end of the game. It just seemed like they had a lot of confidence. And going forward, like, seeing what this team was able to do, if they weren't able to, there was just all these critical mistakes at the wrong times, I think. And I think in some of those games, like we had mentioned, you should have been able to pile up more points and put some separation between teams that you were overmatched and just weren't able to do. And that was a neutral site game in Vegas, but the road games, they just never seemed to put it together and have everything kind of working. And then some of the players that we thought were going to have these breakout years, like a Zachariah Branch, just seemed to, speaking of confidence, he just never seemed to have it with special teams, returning kicks and punts. He just was making the wrong decisions, wasn't getting open, wasn't breaking tackles or getting away from things. And it just seemed like a little thing here and a little thing there. And it kind of all sort of came together where there just wasn't, it just didn't come, you got a lot of good ingredients and it just never came, the dish never came together. And it's hard, especially when you get that early win and you feel like, hey, this is something that you can really build on. There was a lot of talk like, hey, this team could make a run at the college football playoffs. I thought they could, but you can't lose the Minnesota game and the Maryland game, things like that. And it kind of fell apart. And then they were never able to kind of right the ship after that happened. And you make the quarterback change and all that. And it just end up being a mess. That this was not a team that should have went 6-6. So to me, you have to look back up at the head coach and like, hey, what could you have done to kind of keep this together? Because there was enough there that you could have had a good season, maybe not great season, but it just fell apart to end up having a bad season.
By the way, Ty, let me jump in real quick. A lot of teams reflect their head coach. And just when you were saying that, I was just thinking, like, what could you see from Lincoln Riley's temperament? Mm-hmm. Like, was there a reflection of his temperament as, he was growing frustrated and talking about, like, we were 2 minutes away from being like 8-0. And like, was there that kind of like locker room responding to Lincoln Riley, not necessarily in a positive way, because he didn't seem to be projecting a ton of confidence on the sideline?
Yeah, I think it's a good observation. And part of it, his baby is the offensive side of the ball. And sometimes you felt like it wasn't necessarily they're going out trying to do what you needed to win. It was almost trying to like prove a point. Like they go into that Washington game and Washington's secondary was great and you could run all over them. And USC had Woody Marks, who I think is going to probably be a day 2 kind of draft pick, and was really ineffective. They've been really good at getting like transfer running backs in and having be effective. He's the MVP of the team last year. And they end up throwing the ball, I think, 30 times in the first half and running at 8 and just really fell behind against a pretty mediocre Washington squad. Almost like if Washington came out and said, hey, what we want this offense to do, our opponent, we want them to come out and throw the ball all over the place. And that's what they did, made mistakes. And then they started running it more in the second half. But stuff like that, Dan, where you're just like, well, the obvious thing to do is just go out and run the football and you're probably going to have a lot of success. So I think when they weren't having the like kind of top 5 offensive success, some of it looked like they were trying to like prove a point or show people things. And it's not necessarily, hey, we're focused on winning the game. We're focused on like some kind of image that they want to project. So I think that was part of it too. They just that doesn't help too when you're trying to like show something as opposed to just go out and try to win the game, whatever you need to do with your personnel and coaching staff and all that.
Ryan, USC made some big moves, some big news, frankly, this offseason, at least in some circles, by hiring away Chad Bowden from Notre Dame to come in and be the GM of the USC football program. Was just wondering if you could give us some insight, some understanding of the way USC was set up previously and how bringing in somebody like Chad Bowden is now going to affect the overall process. Under the covers, how they're identifying talent. Have you noticed any kind of shifts since he got there?
Yeah, I think it's big, and it's not just him. I think they've really upgraded their overall personnel staff. They have 3 former like Division I general managers, and that's only been a position for a couple of years, but 3 of them, on their staff. And I think a lot of it, with Lincoln Riley, the success they had at Oklahoma brought most of those people over. But the whole personnel game has changed. And we've seen this from USC. I mean, no matter who the coach is, who the AD is, they've been sort of slow to adapt when there's big shifts in the sport. If you remember like the early signing period when that became a thing.
Right.
I mean, it was Clay Helton as the coach. They had all these guys they were trying to get a sign in February. They didn't realize that December was going to be the de facto. So they were sort of left like, hey, what happened? Why did everybody sign? They didn't see that coming. And they've had a lot of success, traditional success. You sort of like to keep doing things the way you were doing it, but the sport's changed a lot, and I think it's changed on the personnel side. And USC was sort of behind as far as the NIL game. They weren't even getting their collective involved in the recruiting process until that Tennessee court case, and then they were allowed to do that. So they've been sort of definitely, I think, in the whole this NIL world, behind the curve there. And I think Jen Cohen has a big part of that. The athletic director, she's come in and just really has been kind of seeing trends and trying to get ahead of them as opposed to reacting to them a year or two later. And I think the one thing she saw was the recruiting aspect wasn't cutting it. They're going to be a portal player, but not big. They really want to get more into the high school recruiting. They've sort of neglected some of the Southern California major high schools, which are some of the best programs in the country, like the Mater Days and St. John Bosco. And Dan knows Oregon's been the beneficiary of that a lot, coming into Southern California and just pillaging and taking the best players. And I think it's a different era where you can't Pete Carroll it and just put a fence around, but they were not getting a lot of these local guys. They got to be at least in on some of these guys. And I think they've done a good job of raising money now. So they actually have like some sort of war chest to be able to compete for some of those guys. But also I think, Oregon has a lot of money, but they also recruit. I mean, they're just relentless recruiters. They're doing a great job at that. It's great having the resources, but you have to put in the work too. And I think USC was lacking the resources. They picked up on that. But they didn't have the personnel staff. And I think they've completely shifted that this offseason. And, now they have the number 1 recruiting class in the country for 2026. We'll see how long that can go, but it's a whole different story on the recruiting trail. And I think Chad Bowden is a big part of that. I know Notre Dame would have loved to keep him. And I think it was Jen Cohen and Lincoln Riley identifying like, this is a glaring issue that we need to fix. And just having personnel staff that are focused on this new way to recruit players where finances are involved. And of course, the House settlement, which we might know about, soon or whatever, like how that's going to impact things. So I think Jen Cohen's been a huge part of that, realizing like we have to put these resources into making football better, and you have to recruit at a higher level. So they went out and spent a lot of money on staff members to bring them in and make it better. So you have coaches coaching, and they're part of it, but you really have this personnel staff that we're seeing the major schools from across the country have. USC really didn't have that, and now they do, and you're seeing kind of benefits right away. There's advantages to being at USC in Southern California and all that, but those don't go as far. They help, but they don't go as far as if you don't have the resources, if you don't have the right people making the right calls and being able to figure out, like, hey, Bailey from Stanford is in the portal. He's going to ask this for this much money. Do we want to bring that guy in, or do we want to bring in 3 other guys for a third of the price? And you have to make those kind of calls with the resource. Everyone has limited resources. You have to make those kind of calls, and I don't think they had the right people in place, and now they do. So we'll see, if they kind of finish this recruiting class strong. But it looks much better. It's like a whole different story from any of the years we've seen Lincoln Riley recruiting out of high school. And I don't think it's a coincidence that you got Chad Bowden in there with his staff, really kind of driving that charge.
We often use the word alignment on this show when talking about the marriage between college football head coach, the administration that is supporting the cause. There may be, you may have answered this already based on your previous answer there, but what is that alignment like between Lincoln Riley and Jen Cohen?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. I mean, there's certainly frustrations on if you're in the athletic department, and you're spending $11 million on a head coach, you don't want to be 13-11
right.
The last 2 seasons. With Jen Cohen takes over and her football team's 13-11. So I think they work together to build that defensive staff, and they did a really good job of that. And then I think this offseason, pushing for the personnel staff, and I think that's helped too. So, I mean, I think she's a problem solver. You look in and like, hey, this is an issue. Defensive staff's an issue. Fix it. Oh, personnel staff's an issue. Fix it. It's taken time, and you're getting there. But I think they, it's sort of one of those things where they have to get along. They have to work together to make things, just work. Because there's people calling the athletic department saying, we want to get rid of Lincoln Riley. And I mean, some of the diehard fans that don't like the air raid or whatever were saying that from the very beginning. And then he goes out and wins 11 games, the Heisman and all that. And, now they're coming back like, look, see, they're bad, they're soft or whatever. And so there's fans that aren't happy, and she'll, her office will be fielding calls like that. But he also has got this, I think ESPN reported there was like a $80 or $90 million buyout. Like, you're not doing that. Like more than Jimbo Fisher money. Like,
oh yeah,
they're not doing.
I was going to ask you about that actually, because that was my next question. Reportedly $90 million in terms of the buyout. I'm not trying to stir any sort of discord in the USC community. I am genuinely asking because we heard some of the irate fans out there on the internet, people who have wrote into us, asking, is this guy on the hot seat? Should he be on the hot seat? Is there any universe in which, given that buyout, Lincoln Riley would actually be on a hot seat?
Yeah, I can't see it. Talking to people, there's sources in the athletic department. I mean, that number I'd heard was real. Now, I think this year it would be less. Maybe it's like 80 or the high 70s, but it's still
that's a lot
north of Jimbo Fisher.
That's a lot of cabbage, man.
There's not a lot of oil tycoons in Southern California that are willing to put that money up like they did at Texas A&M. But so I think there's a possibility, like if it's a bad season this year, that maybe they could try to put something together, but and a lot of fans would come, on our show and my podcast or whatever and be like, hey, they have to fire him. And it's like, I'm not saying, if you're getting paid that much money, you shouldn't be 13 or 11 over a couple of seasons. But there's also a reality of they went in, the previous administration, emptied the pocket, we're going to make this the biggest hire USC's ever had since like the 20s when they hired Howard Jones, who had I think won a national championship at Yale. USC's never hired a proven head coach in the last 100 years. Like, they've hired assistants and things like that. So, prove it or not, he's someone that made the playoffs. He's someone that won Heisman's. So I completely understand you're going out and you're going to sign a very favorable contract for this person because they've never hired someone like that. But then you have some poor results and now you're on the hook for it. So I don't think he can realistically be on the hot seat. Maybe if they have a bad season 2025, they could figure something out. I don't know, but it's the way the contract, from what I was told, the way it was structured is like, fully guaranteed. Like you said, you're when you could spend $70 million on a lot of roster things and things like that. And just, so I think the focus is more about, Jen Cohen's willing to spend money to try to make the program better, personnel staff, defensive staff, whatever you need to do. It behooves her to make him successful. Obviously he wants to be successful. The fans wanted to be successful. So I think that's sort of where the focus is, instead of like trying to figure out how to raise, that's massive amount of money to go hire another coach.
Crazy.
And one of the things a coach can do to ensure that he has job safety is put together an incredible recruiting class. And that's what Lincoln Riley has this year. But what we're not talking about is that last year, Lincoln Riley put together the best class in America of decommitments. I think, right? Did somebody else do a better job?
No, I think
Lincoln Riley's class was the best class in America. Better than Texas's, better than Alabama's, better than Georgia's, if you just look at the decommitments.
Yeah, it was certainly better than their own class. And I think some of that, they hired Eric Henderson, who, famously coached Aaron Donald with the Rams.
Yeah.
And their focus was just out of state, which even this new era of recruiting, it's still easier to recruit local guys than out of state guys. And I think
totally
some of it was splashy stuff, trying to get these huge guys in Georgia and things to, and then they end up not sticking around, and I think that was a lot of flash and a lot of trying to build a recruiting class with excitement. And what I'm seeing now is they're going to get some out of state guys, and maybe they decommit or not, but they're really trying to build from within, and certainly within Southern California. So it seems like there's much more substance to this class. And even if they have like kind of a poor season, you feel like a lot of it would still stay together, where last year it just wasn't. It wasn't even like lasting flash. It was like flash that sort of fell apart kind of quickly. But you're right, like that's a big part of it. And just getting stars isn't it isn't a way to build a recruiting class. I think the way they're doing it now, you're mixing in like 3-star local kids that just like USC or whatever, and also bigger name guys. I think that's the way you sort of really build a recruiting class. But yeah, last year that the commitment class was insane. And but I don't think it was realistic to get those guys. It was more like almost like social media recruiting than anything else.
Right, which obviously backfired tremendously, and depth is hit because it seemed like USC was going to have a very strong class last year, and then guys commit to Georgia, Miami, wherever that were committed, and it makes sense that USC should be able to build more talent and more depth, focusing on the West Coast, focusing locally. But what is the state of the roster right now when there have been some disappointing classes now for USC? Is there star power? Are there young guys who are turning heads early on in spring practice? Like, are there concerns about like, yeah, he's fine, but he's not going to be a difference maker in the Big Ten? Like, what is the state of like the general star power on this roster?
Yeah, I think it's kind of mixed. I think the defensive line does look bigger, stronger, faster. I mean, they brought in a couple transfers that have helped. I mean, a 350-pounder Jamal Jarrett from Georgia, who played sparingly, was hard getting in shape, but he looks like he could be a difference maker for USC. So I think there's some position groups that look better. I mean, I like their linebacker room with like Eric Gentry and Desmond Stevens, but it's not very deep, and you expected them to maybe get a guy from the portal there. So that's where you like the starters, but there's not a lot of depth. I think the same thing on the offensive line. They've recruited better, and they've brought in more bodies, where it was really in bad shape when Lincoln Riley took over. So every year they bring in a couple transfers, and they've sort of helped out there. I like their running back room a lot, and the receivers, they lost some bigger names, but it's more of a Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon. They look like superstar guys that can be out there, and then sort of filling in with some transfers and some younger guys around them. I mean, on the quarterback spot, I don't know. I mean, Jayden Maiava, I think there's a lot of upside there.
Okay.
But you saw that, the pick sixes in the Notre Dame game. He probably had 3 terrible quarters in the game against the bowl game against Texas A&M, but they end up, winning that game. He went 3-1 as a starter, but it's, there was a lot of mistakes there too. And you hope that this offseason that, Lincoln Riley's been a quarterback whisperer, that you can kind of get him going. They have Hassan Longstreet, the 5-star freshman, and then they bring in, Sam Heward, who is the former 5-star, and he might be competing for the backup role. But, I don't know if you feel great about the quarterback spot. You hope that he can kind of turn that around. So I think it goes from position to position, depends on the group. There's some spots you like, and there's some that you're like, there's some concern there. And maybe they, they probably could use a cornerback to come in and start. They lost a lot of guys from the secondary last year out of the portal. If they could get a plug and play linebacker, I think that would help certainly with their depth. I don't think they're going to bring in a quarterback, but who knows? What if you brought in someone, there's a Riley Leonard, someone out there that you end up bringing in and like completely disrupts what they're doing there. So I think there's some options. There's a couple spots I think they could use certainly some more depth, but I think roster wise, it's not terrible. I don't know if it's great, but I think they've done a pretty good job filling in some of the holes that they had, coming out of last season.
Something I'm desperate to see, and I'm sure you are, I'm sure SC fans are, is an offensive line. And just a group of 5 dudes who you're like, that's an offensive line. Yep, they are understanding assignments. Yep, they are not blowing this. Yep, they are, busting open lanes for running backs. And while the running backs were good last year, you saw in that Michigan game early, you saw against Notre Dame at times that this has just not been a strength of this team for 2-3 years now. You looked at what, Caleb Williams was dealing with and what his, the draft evaluations and scouting reports are like, man, you can't fully even evaluate Caleb Williams because of the line in front of him. And now this year, looking at their schedule, the back half is Oregon, it's Iowa, it's Michigan, it's Notre Dame. Is there reason for optimism that even if Jayden Maiava takes this step forward, even if, Jacoby Lane and Mekhi Lemon take this expected step forward as star receivers, are these guys going to have time? Are these guys going to have space? Is there any reason to be a believer in this offensive line finally this year?
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good point. And it's funny, we got an interview with on our show, we got him live. Jean-Ray Reed, they call him Big General. He's a transfer from Syracuse. He was like a 0-star recruit, went to JC, ended up going to Syracuse and like killing it. He's going to be USC's starting center. And just talking to the guy, it was pretty amazing to kind of hear his story and what he's, coming into. And we got to talk to him after practice on Tuesday as well. But we got him for like 40 minutes on our show, and it was great. And I think seeing a guy like that and the calls he's getting, how he's going to try to bring everyone together, I think that's why there's a lot of confidence that this offensive line can try to take, a step forward. I mean, Jonah Monheim was just such a good player for USC, played all over the place and, tried different spots. It's tough to, some of the guys they lost, I think it's going to be tough to replace, but just hearing him, Big General talk about what, they were doing there. And I do like, they got Zach Hansen moving over from tight ends to coach the offensive line. I think, the players we've talked to and people inside the program are like what he's kind of bringing to the table. So I think there's some optimism there, but that's, you got to run the ball. You got to be able to protect the quarterback a little bit. And they just haven't been great at doing that, the last couple of years. So it's certainly going to be a focus of, hey, if they have success, it's probably because the offensive line is playing well. But the big general, Jean-Ray Reed, is the one guy we want to watch. I think he just really impressed me so far from what I've seen. And I think he can be a kind of a difference maker. And the transfers in the offensive line, sometimes they're hit or miss. He's the guy that I'm like, all right, I think he's going to end up doing a lot of good things for USC.
If I were to tell you that this team made incremental improvements everywhere and didn't look crazy sloppy at the end of games, but finished 8-4, is that good enough?
It depends what, defining good enough. It's a manageable schedule, like, are you going to beat, I think it's Ohio State and Oregon, right? Like those are probably going to be, is it Ohio State and Oregon? Yeah, I got to look up, but
they're at Oregon.
There's no Ohio State.
Yeah.
No Ohio State. Was it Oregon and there's one other, Notre Dame. Yeah, that Notre Dame's the other one that you're like, okay,
right, both on the road. Yeah,
probably end up being losses, but like, yeah, you're not playing Ohio State, so that helps. Two more games on that. I mean, Nebraska could be better. There's a lot of teams on the schedule that are like, okay, could be kind of coin flippy. 8-4 depends how it goes. I think, certainly it's an improvement over 6-6, but not necessarily where you want to go. If you're in the 9-3 range, now you're in the talks for kind of playoffs, and
Right.
then you're in that potential group there. So I think it's a manageable schedule. I don't think a lot of the fans would be happy with 8-4. It depends on how it would sort of come together, I guess, and see, if it looks like they've improved, if they're not, leads in 5 fourth quarter games that you lost all of them and things like that, you don't want to have, or losing to a really bad team like a Maryland, things like that. And if you get a couple of road wins, if you can win a couple of those games where their only road win last year, in the Big Ten was UCLA, which doesn't really count. You didn't take a plane. So I don't know if 8-4 would be good enough, but I think for the administration, they'd be like, all right, you got to show, more improvement kind of moving forward there. What can you build on? They got the big recruiting class and all that. But I think like 9-3, I think people would be happier, but I think it'd be tough to do, especially going from, 6-6 and 9-3. It's a pretty big jump.
You mentioned a little bit the quarterback position. Surprised at all that they didn't go out and try to bring in a higher profile transfer. I know you alluded to this, but is Jayden Maiava the dude?
I think he's got to be the dude. I mean, Hewer didn't really get to play at Utah last year. He's kind of, journeyed around a little bit, but I think there's some confidence in him, and his, uncle is on the staff, so I think that sort of helps a little bit. And I think Hassan Longstreet has a lot of, upside too, is a really strong arm. But I think they've, sort of circled the wagons with Jayden Maiava, barring some, weird transfer portal spring thing. But that's really tough to do if you don't even get to go through spring football and come in and try to lead this team. So I think if the opportunity was, after the season to be able to bring in somebody, and I don't know if Lincoln Riley was trying, it just didn't work, or just felt like, hey, Maiava's a guy that we can roll with. Because as soon as you replaced Miller Moss, you knew he was going to be gone. He wasn't going to be coming back. So
sure, right.
Yeah, I think Maiava's a guy that's like pretty hard on himself, and I think the coaches kind of see that as this is someone that's being, he's knows when things aren't going the right way and they should be going better. And they must have some confidence that they can kind of clean up some of the loose ends, because he can put the ball in harm's way. And if you look at the, turnover potential, there's a lot of plays that had high turnover potential.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, to throw 299 or whatever yard pick sixes and, the Notre Dame, they're driving down 7 against Notre Dame, playoff team, made it to the national championship game, certainly a position to try to beat the Fighting Irish, and then 2 pick sixes kind of doom you there. So I think they see, hey, this guy has the potential to be great. And it's going to be up to this coaching staff to kind of like clean things up a little bit with him. But yeah, I don't think they will. It would be really shocking if they went and got somebody in the portal. I think the time would have been to do it in the fall. Yeah. I kind of thought they would, but he did.
I did too. Dan and I talked a lot about that. That's why I bring it up. I mean, I think we like the potential of Jay Maiava, and I mean, you could see it. He's obviously got a pretty impressive set of, tools out there, but I don't know, just for a program and for a coach, especially who has made his name so much on being this quarterback whisperer, I was a little surprised they didn't try to make a move on that front.
And it's it's very common. Like we've all seen a lot of, quarterbacks go from one place as a 1-year rental or whatever it is and have a ton of success. And it's not like it's unprecedented. Lincoln Riley's done it. And, we've just seen it happen everywhere where you can go out and bring somebody in, and Dylan Gabriel, it was a huge year or whatever, we've seen that happen. So I was a little surprised. And to me, it says, I think they could have got someone if they really wanted. And it seems like it was a decision made internally. Like, okay, we see enough upside in him and we can clean up some of the issues that you have as far as the turnover worthy plays and all that. But yeah, I was a little surprised too. I thought they would kind of bring someone in, at least to compete and, see how it goes. Because it's worked so well. It's like, it's one of those things where in college football, bringing in a senior, veteran quarterback has worked for all different kinds of teams we've seen. So, yeah, I was a little surprised they didn't end up doing that.
Can we interest Lincoln Riley and Drew Pine? I hear he is available again.
He's still around? Jeez.
He's still around. He's going for his 4th team now.
Drew Pine is ready to play. It almost seems like with the quarterback thing that, to what you were saying before, that it wasn't about winning games, it was about proving a point. And it almost seems like, I mean, again, Jayden Maiava seems fine, but he also may lead the sport in forcing his own fans into being relieved that a throw wasn't an interception, which that was kind of the experience last year. It was either going to be an interception, it was going to be a great pass, or it was going to be a relief for Trojan fans that as he ran out of bounds and threw the ball straight up, that nobody from the other team came down with it, that Lincoln Riley is proving that he can turn anybody into an all-conference caliber quarterback by, sticking this through. I don't know. That's the impression I think I got.
That's interesting. And, one of my writers, Gerard Martinez, talked about that too with like Miller Moss, where he was a different kind of quarterback than mostly, even like a Baker Mayfield. There was more athleticism there. Not that Miller Moss wasn't athletic, but was it to show like, hey, I can make a guy like this have to be the most, it doesn't have to be the most mobile quarterback. It's not Jalen Hurts or whatever, Kyler Murray. Is it proving a point? I don't know. I mean, coaches are so paranoid. There's a lot of egos there. Mm-hmm. You don't know what you think, like as a fan or whatever, like, oh, you're just trying to win games, but sometimes you're trying to prove points, and maybe it's, maybe it's not. I'm curious to see. But yeah, that could be part of it too, Dan.
What, this is my final question. I just want to know the vibes this year compared to last year, compared to the season before, fans in the program, with regard to the roster. Like, is there confidence that like, oh, if we just win 2-3 more of those dumb loss type fourth quarters, we're fine? Or is like, why are we a program that can't close those types of games out? Like, are the vibes higher than recent or right around the same? Like, what is the check right now?
It's funny. I think the vibes have got a little better, at least with the fan base, but not necessarily because, oh, they were so close in this, so close in that game. A lot of the fans, especially the diehard ones, I mean, they love the offseason. They love the recruiting aspect of things. And to get your butt kicked by like Oregon in recruiting in the offseason, even though it doesn't necessarily impact, that season, but it impacts the morale of the fans. And seeing that USC is going out and actually competing on the recruiting trail again, even though there's 2026 guys are not going to play in 2025, it's actually, I think, given the fans some confidence. I mean, it's different. Like, Ohio State went out, they were so upset losing to Michigan 3 years in a row or whatever, and they have this amazing offseason. And you had like Michigan fans had won the national title, but for whatever reason, Ohio State fans were more optimistic just because they did all these things in the offseason. I think that is part of what kind of gets fans excited, and maybe you get more excited for the season knowing that, hey, they're trying hard to do these things.
There's momentum.
There's momentum there. So I think there's a little bit of that. I think the reality will come when fall camp starts and you're like, hey, those 2026 guys you recruited aren't coming in. You got to worry with this roster right now. So I think maybe it'll check a little bit, but right now there's actually an uptick, but it's mostly because they've just recruiting better, and that's USC fans in general. That's what they love. They all, they would win the offseason a lot and then sort of like underperform during the season. They've been underperforming on the recruiting trail. That's like a weird spot. We're like, hey, we always go get these guys. And
you got to win on one or the other. You either got to recruit well or you got to win games. You can't screw up both.
And they have been. So so little optimism, I guess.
Ryan, let's close it out with this, just because I'm curious. The episodes that we have done, I guess, earlier in this week, both publicly and our private bonus episode, we've talked about how this is sort of the bottom of the off season as you get into like the late stages of March, early weeks of April. How do you cover USC in April? What is on your radar now? What storylines are you going to track now through April and into May?
Yeah, so I mean, April's not bad because we have spring football to cover. It's not as much. We don't get to watch as much, but you do get opportunities to like interview the players. We hear from Lincoln Riley a couple times a week, and then we've been lucky enough to work with USC's collective House of Victory, and they provided us interviews. So we're going to get like Jamal Jarrett on Friday, and we got Big General. He was great, but to sit with a kid for like 30 minutes, 40 minutes, where we get them for like 5 after a game or practice, it's a lot better. You get to kind of know them a little bit more. So we try to focus on that. Once it gets to May, then things like really start to slow down, and there's just it's more of a desert as far as that stuff goes. But we try to cling on to whatever we can in April. I can get some photos or some video from practice and the small window we get in some of these interviews. But after April, it's sort of it gets in the dregs, and you start doing your top 10 shows and things like that, or whatever your top 10 list, whatever you got to do.
Brian Abraham, yeah. You can use that title.
Perfect.
Ryan Abraham, USCFootball.com, one of our longest running friends here, not just on the show, but sports podcasting as a whole. Ryan, great to talk as always. We'll bring you back soon. All right.
Love it. Thanks so much for having me on, guys.
All right. Again, Ryan Abraham, one of our longest running friends on this show. I've said that 3 times now, but I mean it. We've had Ryan on countless times. He does deserve the smoking jacket if we can uncover enough in the budget.
Mm-hmm.
Let me circle back to the question that you and I posed at the very start of this episode. Based on,
can we go deep sea fishing with Ryan for fresh sushi grade ahi?
But also, in addition to that, based on what you heard, trending up, trending down, good vibes, bad vibes, scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being best. Where are you at on USC based on what Ryan just said?
I don't think they're far off. I don't think they're far off because of what we talked about at the end, because of those close losses, like losing to Maryland last year when they were the only Big Ten win for the Terps is just inexcusable. And you saw how, and confidence was a good word, that USC was just like, well, they're closing on the road. This isn't going to end well. And whether it was that Washington game, whether it was I think Minnesota was on the road, Maryland, we're just like, it doesn't take much to figure out as a team collectively, like how to finish games and to play with a little bit more confidence and get the ball to your playmakers and just not make stupid mistakes. Like that's a correctable thing in the offseason. So because there seems to be decent amount of star power at receiver, I think they'll be okay at running back. On defense, I like Danton Lynn. I like that they don't play a huge collection of obviously great quarterbacks right now. That their quarterback schedule seems to be pretty good. We'll see what happens at Michigan. We'll see how Dante Moore is at Oregon. We'll see how I assume CJ Carr is at Notre Dame. But like by and large, there's not you're not looking at a murderer's row of like, how are they going to handle this guy type quarterbacks when you look at their schedule right now. So I don't know. He's been there long enough. He's made the defensive changes. The vibes seem to be good enough that like they can win games in different ways if everybody's on the same page. And so I don't think there's any reason that USC can't occupy that 8-4, 9-3 space in the Big Ten.
I would put it at a solid 7.1.
Yeah, that's fine.
On a scale of 1 to 10. What I am very curious about is how long it takes for this new age, this new personnel setup with Chad Bowden to truly take effect. As Ryan said, they're doing very well in early recruiting. They've done extremely well on that front. Right now, if you go and look at team rankings, they're number 1 class of 2026. That's going to change a million times between now and the end of the recruiting cycle.
Right.
But it's at least a very positive sign. I'm curious, though, to see if there are any kind of boosts that USC picks up in time for the 25 season, or if that is all just going to be thinking further down the line. That to me is really interesting.
Yeah.
But right now I still like the coach, generally speaking. I'm not going to act like there's a whole lot of names on this roster that I look at and I say, oh, that's a gravitational player.
Right.
I like the receivers, generally like Jayden Maiava. I like Danton Lynn, as you do, but I'm not looking at the roster, at least not at this point in early April, and saying that's a guy that teams are going to have to like build their entire scheme around.
Right.
That's the part to me that I think is missing. But again, it's very early. We have a long way to go before we get to the season, and clearly those names could emerge in the spring and the fall, what have you. So a little bit premature to jump too far in or out, I guess, on USC. But right now, vibes I think are still pretty good.
Right, and it's also just a question still of, like, do they have the 6th best roster in the Big Ten? Like, where do they fall in terms of...
I don't know.
What is
That's the question.
That killer element of this team. Yeah. And a lot of teams can point to the experience or the star power or just, the history on one side of the ball with regard to like Iowa's defense. And you could say that about Lincoln Riley's offense for a long, long time. Took a hit last year. And
it did.
When you make a quarterback change in the middle of the year, that's not really a common Lincoln Riley. He had the Spencer Rattler, the Caleb Williams thing. It's just not a Lincoln Riley occurrence that like he finds his guy, that's his guy, they succeed with that guy. And so that's, there's still room for USC to grow for sure.
50th, or I should say 50th percentile in terms of returning production on offense, 43rd percentile on defense. overall relative to the field, something like 95th or 97th. I forget the exact number in the column that Bill Connolly posted a couple weeks ago out at ESPN.com. So new faces, going to need some newcomers to step in and replace that production. We'll see how they do. Obviously, if you have thoughts on this, you can always email us, solidverbal@gmail.com. Hit us up on social media, going out to verballers.com, sign up and be part of our Discord. Of course, you know the drill here. We always welcome your feedback. Would love to hear from SC fans that are out there passing through, maybe finding us for the first time on YouTube, or some of our long-timers who maybe aren't SC fans but just have an opinion on the Trojans. You know, you can always reach out and let us know your thoughts.
Or if you want Ty in person, I think you're heading to the Castleville Mill, Castle Valley Mill. Now, obviously, you're going to be there before people are able to hear this show, but you never know when Ty might stop by to replenish his whole wheat flour stock. So
no, this is a very big deal for me now.
Castle Love Valley, that I got you down to this.
Not a sponsor
level.
Could be. I don't know if local flour mills are doing podcast sponsorships these days.
Yeah, we found out that there's just a 1-to-1 overlap of locally milled flour enthusiasts and college football podcast listeners. It's great.
This is what happens to my brain in the off season.
Get at us, King Arthur. Come on.
For that guy over there, my good friend Dan Rubenstein, for myself, Ty Hildeman, for our guest of honor, Ryan Abraham at USCfootball.com. Thanks so much for downloading, for listening. Have a great weekend. We'll catch you all next week. Stay solid.
Peace.